And we'll be announcing something very soon on pharmaceuticals that they're going to be tariffed if they have to bring the pharmaceuticals into the country, the drugs and other things into the country. They're going to be tariffed at a very, very high rate, like 200%.
On July 8th, President Donald Trump made a bold declaration that would reverberate throughout the global political and economic landscape. Standing before his cabinet, Trump confirmed that the United States was set to impose a staggering 200% tariff on pharmaceuticals from any country that failed to bring drug manufacturing onto American soil. The policy, which would come into effect after an 18-month grace period, has sent shockwaves through global health systems, with many of America's closest allies bracing for the economic fallout. The announcement, however, was not just about numbers on a balance sheet. It symbolized the increasing transactional nature of international relations under Trump, a move aimed at reshaping the global order, one trade at a time. The tariffs were positioned as a blunt force method to force foreign countries into bringing their pharmaceutical production to the U.S. soil. But with such a large price tag attached to every pharmaceutical product imported into the United States, the repercussions of this move are far-reaching. Australia, one of the largest exporters of pharmaceuticals to the U.S., stands on the front lines of this policy shift. The island nation's top pharmaceutical exports, including blood plasma and vaccines, come from CSL, a global biotech firm that operates plants in both the U.S. and Australia. Last year alone, Australia exported over $2 billion worth of pharmaceuticals to America, making it one of their top 5 export categories. But it isn't just the trade numbers that make this policy troubling for Australia. The core of the issue lies in the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme, PBS, a policy that forces drug companies to negotiate prices with the Australian government before they can be subsidized for the public. This system, aimed at keeping medicine affordable, has long been a thorn in the side of the U.S. pharmaceutical lobby. Trump's new tariff proposal appears to be retaliation for Australia's refusal to dismantle PBS, a scheme that the U.S. sees as undermining market principles. While Australia has voiced deep concern over the impact of such tariffs, the Albanese administration remains steadfast in defending the PBS, arguing that to capitulate would only drive up costs for Australians. The U.S.-Australia relationship, once a cornerstone of cooperation in the Pacific, now finds itself at a crossroads. The situation has become even more complicated given the tight deadline that Trump has set for August 1st. Time is running out for Australia to negotiate a favorable resolution, and the implications of the tariff are stark. If the U.S. goes ahead with the tariff plan, it could destabilize pharmaceutical supply chains, impacting not only global markets but also the affordability of medicine for millions of people. Australia's response remains firm, but the geopolitical tension is unmistakable. While Australia faces this public confrontation with the U.S., Canada finds itself in a more delicate position. Unlike Australia, Canada has not yet received a formal tariff letter from the U.S., but the risk is ever present. The Canadian pharmaceutical industry is intricately connected to the U.S. market, with raw materials often passing through multiple borders before they reach patients. Around 80 to 90% of the raw materials for Canadian pharmaceuticals come from China or India, which makes the imposition of a 200% tariff potentially catastrophic for Canada's drug supply chains. However, Canada's approach to this looming threat is far more subtle. The government has already begun to compile a list of critical medications that will be insulated from any potential shortages. Behind the scenes, Canadian officials are working tirelessly with American lawmakers and healthcare experts to secure exemptions based on humanitarian grounds. It's a quiet battle of influence, one that involves building alliances with key players within the U.S. to ensure that Canada's position is heard. President Trump's strategy is clear. He seeks to use the tariff threat as a tool to pressure other countries into renegotiating their trade deals with the U.S. By setting such high barriers, he aims to force countries like Australia, Canada, and others to open up their markets in exchange for tariff relief. The success of this strategy remains to be seen, but it's already evident that the tariff war over pharmaceuticals will have profound long-term consequences, not only for the health sector but also for U.S. relations with its closest allies. As the clock ticks towards Trump's August 1st deadline, the global trade landscape is rapidly evolving. While the pharmaceutical industry braces for the looming 200% tariff, the U.S. president's broader tariff strategy is causing tremors far beyond the healthcare sector. On July 7th, Trump sent formal letters to Japan and South Korea, threatening to impose a 25% tariff on all their exports to the U.S. unless they open up their markets to American goods. This new policy, set to take effect on August 1st, highlights the increasing tensions in U.S. trade relations, where allies once treated with respect are now being handled as adversaries. For Japan and South Korea, two of America's most steadfast allies in the region, this move is particularly concerning. They are not just trade partners, they are cornerstone allies economically, strategically, and militarily. Yet the tariff letters sent by Trump do not distinguish between allies and adversaries. By imposing a 25% tariff on all Japanese and South Korean exports, Trump is effectively holding them hostage, using the threat of tariffs as leverage to secure trade concessions. The immediate market response to the tariff threat was swift. On July 7th, Nissan stock fell by 5%, Toyota dropped 1.25%, and Honda saw a decrease of 1.5%. The impact was not confined to the auto industry alone. U.S. stock markets also reacted negatively, with the Dow, Nasdaq, and S&P 500 all experiencing a dip of around 1%. But the true damage isn't just measured in stock prices, it's the erosion of trust in the U.S. as a reliable trading partner. The once sturdy alliances between the U.S., Japan, and South Korea are now being tested by economic pressure, and the trust that has been built over decades of cooperation is beginning to crack. The U.S. government, for its part, insists that the tariff strategy is part of a broader negotiation tactic designed to force open foreign markets to U.S. goods. In Trump's view, tariffs are a tool of strength, an economic means of securing trade concessions that benefit the U.S. economy. If Japan and South Korea retaliate with their own tariffs, the U.S. would increase the tariff rates even further. However, if they open their markets, the tariffs could be lowered. The approach is designed to create leverage in trade talks, but the chaotic unpredictability of the strategy is starting to backfire. In a world where international trade is increasingly interconnected and sensitive to disruptions, Trump's strategy of applying blanket tariffs as a negotiating tool risks damaging long-term relationships. With over 100 countries potentially affected by the tariff framework, including both major economies and smaller nations, there is simply not enough bandwidth within the U.S. government to negotiate bespoke deals for every country. This leaves many countries, especially smaller ones, facing blanket tariffs of 10 to 25%, regardless of the context of their trade relations with the U.S. The result is a global economic system rife with uncertainty. Foreign leaders are left scrambling to navigate this shifting landscape, unsure whether their countries will be the next targets of tariffs. In particular, the U.S. relationship with smaller economies, which lack the leverage to negotiate exemptions, is becoming increasingly strained. And with such uncertainty hanging in the air, markets are reacting with caution, afraid that these tariffs are less a means of negotiation and more a signal of a new, unpredictable era in U.S. trade policy. For Canada, the situation is especially complex. As of early July, Canada had not received any formal tariff letters from the U.S. regarding pharmaceuticals or other exports. However, the risk of being dragged into this chaotic tariff system is very real. Canada has become a vital part of the North American supply chain, with significant trade flows in industries such as aluminum, automotive parts, and pharmaceuticals. While Canada has avoided the spotlight for now, it is quietly preparing for the worst. In fact, Canada's approach to the tariff threat has been notably different from Australia's. While Australia has publicly confronted Trump's policy, Canada has taken a more calculated, behind-the-scenes approach. Canada's government, under Prime Minister Mark Carney, has focused on preparing support packages for domestic industries, particularly aluminum, which is still facing U.S. tariffs of up to 50%. Rather than engaging in a public confrontation with the U.S., Canada has kept its response muted, preferring to work quietly behind the scenes to build diplomatic bridges. But Canada's restraint is not just about avoiding a public confrontation, it's also about strategic positioning. By withdrawing from the digital services tax, a point of contention with the U.S., Canada has opened the door to negotiations. At the same time, Prime Minister Carney has stressed the importance of Canada's role in assisting the U.S. on broader geopolitical issues, including trade with China, labor protections, and border security. Canada is positioning itself as a critical ally, one that can help the U.S. achieve broader objectives beyond trade. The question, however, remains, how long can Canada continue to play this quiet waiting game? With the August 1st deadline fast approaching, the stakes are growing higher. Trump's tariff play could backfire as Canada and other nations may resist, holding out for a more reasonable deal. As the situation unfolds, both sides will need to assess the long-term costs of this economic game of chicken. The world will be watching to see how these alliances evolve. As the August 1st deadline looms ever closer, it becomes increasingly clear that the economic and diplomatic ramifications of President Trump's tariff strategy are far-reaching, not just for the US but for its allies as well. Canada's quiet resistance, coupled with the intense pressure mounting on countries like Japan, South Korea, and Australia, signals a tectonic shift in global trade dynamics. While Trump's high-stakes game of tariff diplomacy may seem like a show of strength, it risks isolating the United States, one ally at a time. The central thrust of Trump's strategy is simple: raise the stakes so high that countries will be compelled to negotiate bilateral trade deals. It worked with steel and autos, but as the tariffs begin to touch upon more sensitive areas, such as pharmaceuticals and key industries in allied countries, the strategy is encountering unforeseen challenges. The very countries that the US once saw as partners in the global order are now forced to re-evaluate their relationships with the US. And many are choosing to push back, rather than comply with Trump's ultimatum. Canada's handling of this situation provides an intriguing counterpoint to the more vocal confrontations happening with countries like Australia. Prime Minister Mark Carney has opted for a strategy of quiet resistance. Rather than caving to the pressure of the looming tariff deadline, Carney has used the situation to reposition Canada as a partner to the US in broader geopolitical matters. This approach has involved a subtle yet significant shift in rhetoric, with Carney emphasizing Canada's role in helping the US navigate its trade tensions with China and address labor protections and border security concerns. In contrast to the high-profile political standoffs in Australia and Japan, Canada's restraint is starting to pay off. With markets in North America responding favorably to this approach, optimism is building, especially as Canadian stocks have rallied and the TSX hit record highs. However, this strategy is not without its risks. If Carney holds firm past the July 21st deadline, the US could follow through on its threat and impose punitive tariffs. Such a move would likely cause job losses in border states and create economic uncertainty across industries. But the political calculus for Canada is clear. Carney has room to wait, and he is not about to be pressured into a hasty deal. For the US, the longer this standoff continues, the more it risks alienating critical trading partners and allies. Trump's trade war may have started as a fight over steel and automobiles, but it is quickly becoming a war of attrition against the very nations that helped build the global order in the post-World War II era. By pressuring countries like Japan and South Korea, Trump is testing the limits of American influence, and in doing so, he is challenging the very fabric of international diplomacy. If these tariff threats continue unchecked, the global economic system could fracture as countries begin to seek alternatives to US markets. For China, this may present an opportunity to step into the void left by a fragmented US-led trading system. Beijing is watching the situation closely, waiting for the divisions between the US and its allies to deepen further. The more the US pushes its allies away, the more China stands to gain from a weakened transatlantic and trans-Pacific alliance. At the heart of this escalating trade war lies the question of how much economic pain the US is willing to inflict on its allies in order to achieve short-term political gains. While Trump's rhetoric has been aggressive, the practical implications of his tariff diplomacy are becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The tariffs are not just hitting manufacturers and businesses, they are hurting ordinary consumers, medical patients, and entire industries that rely on stable international trade. The broader geopolitical consequences of this strategy are also becoming evident. Japan and South Korea, for example, are not just economic partners, they are military allies that have supported the US in its defense and security initiatives in Asia for decades. By treating them like adversaries in this trade war, Trump risks weakening the US military presence in the region and undermining its ability to influence events in the Asia-Pacific. The same can be said for Europe, where long-standing partnerships are being tested by Trump's approach to trade and diplomacy. As the deadline nears, the world is holding its breath, watching to see whether the US will follow through on its tariff threats or whether it will shift course. If Trump sticks to his guns and imposes the tariffs, he may win short-term leverage, but at what cost? If he backs down, it could be seen as a sign of weakness, but it could also signal a willingness to engage in more meaningful long-term trade negotiations. Either way, the fallout from these policies is bound to be felt for years to come, as allies turn into adversaries and international trust erodes. One thing is certain, the global trading system will never be the same again. Whether this results in a new, more fragmented order or a return to the old status quo will depend largely on the decisions made in the coming weeks. The U.S. has the power to shape this outcome, but whether it will do so in a way that benefits its citizens and its international allies remains to be seen. The U.S. is standing at a crossroads, where the future of global trade and diplomacy is being written in real time, with each tariff letter marking another chapter in this high-stakes global